Hi everybody, I'm Katie.
I'm Lizzie.
And we are your hosts for episode 1 of Emergency Cooking. Stress, coping and
soup.
As emergency clinicians, stress is part of our everyday life, but things are really heightened at the moment. So I thought I'd bring Lizzie in to have a chat about stress and coping in emergency departments. Liz, what are the main stresses that emergency clinicians experience, or what are the main causes of stresses in your experience?
Katie, within emergencies, they do vary from ED to ED or emergency care setting to emergency care setting. But most commonly, clinicians report to being exposed to heavy workloads or high workloads. That unpredictable volume, high patient acuity is another one, and poor skill mix. Occupational violence does creep up, so that one is in there as well. But one thing I've noticed is that clinicians don't seem to report that to be as stressful as what they used to, or not so much as they used to. It doesn't seem to rate as highly as some of the other ones in terms of how stressful they find that.
Why?
Look, I guess my opinion might be is that we are experiencing it now for quite some period of time, that potentially we're desensitised. There's other evidence out there to say that when you've got, security and things like that in place, that maybe we have that sort of false sense of security that there's other people there that can help us when there is occupational violence. But it is certainly a stressor for clinicians, both here in Australia and around the world.
Great, thank you. Now, she sounds like she knows what she's talking about, and there's a reason for it. But first, are you hungry?
I am famished.
So I'm going to duck off and make some soup, and when I come back we'll have a bit more of a chat. But while I'm gone, do you want to tell them why it is you know so much about stress?
Sure. So Katie, you asked why I know a bit about stress in emergency clinicians. Well, I'm doing my PhD in stress and coping, and how I started that journey was a few years ago. I sort of noticed, even in myself and among other clinicians, that the twinkle in the eye was starting to fade. So when I was a new nurse to emergency, everything was exciting. There's the multiple births out the front of the hospital, those traumas, stabilising those really unwell patients, it all got the adrenaline rushing. And over time I noticed that amongst the cohort of my peers that we were starting to lose people. Really senior experienced clinicians were starting to leave emergency nursing or emergency care. The conversations were starting to go from really excited to really drained and exhausted, and I wanted to know why. There was a lot out there when I started to read on burnout, and so I thought, well, it's if we know a lot about burnout, what is it that leads us to burnout, and what is it that we can do to stop burnout from potentially happening in our cohorts or amongst our emergency clinicians. So I thought, what better way than to actually understand something than to start a PhD. So I'm in my final phase of my PhD, and I am hoping to submit it soon.
So, now that I've made a fresh pot of soup and you all know how to make it, let's continue the conversation. How's your soup?
This is amazing. It's so nice when somebody else cooks for you. Thanks, Katie.
I'd like to say that it's a cold, wintry day here on the Gold Coast, but it's like blue skies and 27 degrees. Bit hot for soup, but we're going with it. Liz, what's the first thing that you would recommend as clinicians that we should be doing to improve our work environment with stress?
So, Katie, I think the very first thing we need to do as clinicians is to actually start to have the conversation. We need to identify what the stresses are for our particular EDs or emergency care settings. So, what might be stressful in my ED might not necessarily be an issue at the ED you work in. So it's important that we actually start to identify what are the stresses that we're experiencing, how frequently we're exposed to them, and how stressful that particular stressor is for us. So is it affecting us? Are we coping okay? Or is it something that we need to start to manage?
And can I have more than one stressor? Can I have a whole heap of them?
Unfortunately, you can have way more than one stressor. So, and it depends, and what might be really stressful on this particular shift today might not necessarily be so stressful tomorrow. And I think you need to look wider and actually look at what are the factors that contribute to those particular stresses at those instances.
And then what do you recommend that we do to help mitigate these stresses?
Well, once you identify the stresses that are, particular for your ED or that are of a particular concern, you need to then start thinking about what you can actually do to, address those. And not everything is, I say, fixable, but there is things that we can put in place to make things better or less stressful. So as clinicians, we need to be at the forefront of that discussion. We need to be one identifying the stresses and then coming to the party with potential solutions. We understand our work environments. We're the ones who, understand how things flow or what might work and what might not work in that particular area. So, there's lots of evidence out there that having those end users, so that's us as clinicians, the people who will be, using or being, exposed to that intervention. Actually, if you have those in this conceptualisation phase, right through to the design, implementation, and again in the evaluation phase, that it's more likely to be sustainable. Include management in there.
Okay.
Because we need to have that conversation with them. They need to. They're going to drive change as well, just as much. But we need to drive the change.
What do you do outside of work to help with your stress levels?
Outside of my work, I'd like to say I run, but that's not the case.
So would I.
For me, I have a number of different strategies.
Yep.
I personally have strong connections with friends who work in emergency, so I can have those debriefs, those informal debriefs
over soup
conversations. They're really, really important to me to actually have people who get it, who understand.
They understand.
Understand, absolutely. I love yoga and meditation, so I try to make time each week for yoga and meditation for myself.
Like, you're a fast-paced kind of girl, right? Like, you're always thinking and always on the go. How do you meditate? How do you get it all to stop?
Well, that's the important thing about meditation. It doesn't have to stop. So, I know, right? So, when I first started meditating, I was only able to do a few minutes at a time. And I was attending a meditation seminar, and somebody actually asked that, like, all these thoughts come to your mind. And the person leading the seminar said they're actually really important thoughts. So, you actually grab them, acknowledge them, and then pack them away.
I've been reading the wrong book on meditation. I can't empty my head.
I don't empty my head. I try to empty my head, and if something pops up, I think about it, I pack it away, and I move on. I also like to surf.
Fancy that. So do I.
I don't know, I'm certainly not on the world tour, but I do enjoy paddling out the back and spending time in the ocean. For me, that's quite cathartic to spend some time out there with some friends and
you are the only person I know that is almost drowned in shallow ankle deep water through no fault of your own. It was my fault.
Well, I wasn't going to say that you might have taken me out in the surf, but that's okay.
Good times.
So for me, it's definitely about having time away from that chaotic, crazy world and just really investing in myself and having time where I like to relax and go for coffees for breakfast. I certainly love food and eating out with friends. So there's sorts of things that I do to cope. But it's about having balance too, acknowledging that some days in the emergency department or wherever you might be working are going to be rougher than others, and then being able to have strategies at your ready to help you cope that are, you know, effective and healthy.
Great. So for all of you at home, please stay well, stay safe, and we really hope that you enjoyed the first episode of Emergency Cooking.